actually serve. So while these guys are serving, they're persecuting their families on the other
Right.
side. Um, and I think the reason why this had not been really looked at until the 90s when I got into it is because, first of all, we're trying to come to terms still with how does a sophisticated, educated nation like Germany slaughter 6 million people just because of their religion or ethnic background?
Okay, so today I have with me Bryan Rigg. You are an author and historian, and man, I'm really excited to talk to you because you dove into some, the topic of World War II and German soldiers and Jews, and you know what? Let's dive into that because you've written more than one book. Um, First of all, how many books have you written, and is the topic all World War II?
I've written now what soon will be published. It will be a total of 8 books. 6 of them are on World War II and the Holocaust. One is on ADHD and dyslexia because I struggled with that, failed first grade twice, wasn't supposed to get out of high school. And then I have 3 children that struggled with it, but I got them all into college. They're doing extremely well, very high level on the SAT. And so I talk about what helped me overcome those learning differences. They used to call them learning disabilities. And then what I did to help my kids overcome it. And then I have a book coming out this summer called A Case Against Christ, which is in response to Lee Strobel's famous book from the 90s called A Case for Christ, but he was very sloppy with his research. And I go into, that the Jewish Messiah prophecies, if you will, were not seen in Jesus' life. So if you're going to say that he's a Jewish Messiah, you have to say it's under a whole new criteria. You can't use the old criteria. So it's very academic, going into religious history. And I used to teach religious history at SMU. So that's my 8th book. But most of my corpus of my books are World War II, the Holocaust, human rights.
That's awesome, man. I'm a big World War II history buff myself. I don't really know like a whole lot about World War II, just the stories and the independent research that I've done since high school. It has the subject itself is there's so much information, it's overwhelming at times.
Mhm.
How when you're doing research for your books, the amount of research that it takes and the amount of stories that there are from World War II, how do you pick and choose which stories you want to write about?
Well, the first story, which is the subject matter of my first book, if you will, the first story that got me interested in World War II, it's called Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. It's about Jews and men of Jewish descent who served in the Nazi military. So, at the time I was 21 years old, I was in Germany learning the language of my ancestors, and I wanted to go see the places where they came from as well. And when I was there that summer in 1992, I saw a film called Europa, Europa, which is on Netflix. It's a very good film about World War II, and it's about Shlomo Perel, a Jew who found himself with false papers serving in the Nazi military. And as I watched this film in Germany, I was sitting next to a guy who had helped find a seat. He was an older man, and he was translating the dialogue. We were basically the only ones in the cinema at this time. And after the film, I asked him what he thought. He said, "It's very close to my own history. Would you like to go talk?" I said, "Sure." So we went to a bar, and he told me his story for the whole night. And he was of Jewish descent and served in the Nazi military. And then a few months later, when I was doing research on my own family's background, I found a lot of Jews in the family branches. So this summer, I was thinking, what are the coincidences that this kid goes to a film about a Jew who served in the Nazi military, only to sit next to a Wehrmacht veteran of Jewish descent, and then only to find out my own Jewish background a few months later. So I was like, okay, something in the heavens picked me to kind of look into this. So when I came back to Yale University to start my sophomore year, I asked a lot of my professors about this, and they basically said I wouldn't find anything. But I was like, that's not a coincidence of watching this film and then sitting next to a guy. So I started that of the same kind of pedigree, genealogy, if you will, and the same story of being in the Nazi military with Jewish background. I was like, there has to be more of them. So this started a 10-year saga that I started looking into this, finding ways to find these guys, interviewing them, and then asking them for contacts. And before you knew it, I was a graduate student at Cambridge University, and I had conducted over 400 interviews with men of Jewish descent who served in the Nazi military. And I started finding out that Hitler allowed very high-ranking officers, four-star generals, field marshals, battleship commanders to be in the military, even though they had Jewish background. He would quote unquote Aryanize them. So not only was it looking this history, looking at, grunts, if you will, but it was also looking at very influential people who developed blitzkrieg strategy, developed the Wehrmacht in the powerful military organization that it was. And so the question is, how did this happen? Why were there so many people of Jewish in the Nazi military? What does this tell us about what people can know about the Holocaust? Which was a huge question that people have struggled with. Did the Germans know about this or not know about it? Did Hitler, was he good at keeping it quiet, or was everybody in on the game, so to speak? So when you ask me how do people get into the research, this one just kind of fell into my lap, and before I knew it, my professors at Yale, as well as my professors at Cambridge, were like, "This is incredible, Bryan. Nobody's looked at this subject matter." And I found that probably around 150,000 men of Jewish descent served in the Nazi military as what
Wow.
the Nazis called either half Jews or quarter Jews. And probably there was about 10,000 maybe quote unquote full Jews with false papers. Because if you were full Jewish, you couldn't serve. But what was crazy is that Nazi Germany actually required half Jews, either two Jewish grandparents or quarter Jews, one Jewish grandparent, to actually serve. So while these guys are serving, they're persecuting their families on the other
Right.
side. And I think the reason why this had not been really looked at until the 90s when I got into it is because, first of all, we're trying to come to terms still with how does a sophisticated, educated nation like Germany slaughter 6 million people just because of their religion or ethnic background? It's
Right.
still mind-numbing to people. And then on the other side, they're trying to figure out how did Hitler take this nation and create one of the most massive world wars that mankind has ever known. So people are studying the military history or the Holocaust, and they never really looked at how those maybe crossed over within the military because they thought there's no way any of these people served in the military. And
Right.
what I found is that due to assimilation in Germany for decades, if not over 100 years, you had many people of Jewish descent who were in the society. And how Jewish did you have to be bad under the Nazis? And this was a very fluid definition. And so it answers a lot of questions about the Holocaust, what people could know, what you could do, and so on. So that's how I fell into that particular chapter. And to open it up to maybe some questions that you have, I'll give you one other example of how I got into World War II history. So that Hitler's Jewish soldiers study spawned a couple other books, and then during this time, I was always interested in why does nobody talk about Japan's Holocaust? What they did.
Yeah, I
I
didn't
mean,
even
we hear about the rape of
I honestly didn't even know about Japan's Holocaust until recently. So uh, so we're talking about Unit 371. I think it was 371 or
731.
731. So there's a little bit of that dyslexia
Hey, no
there.
problem.
I don't actually have dyslexia. That was a joke. um, so I never really understood or heard about any of these things. Like in high school, I never understood or heard about any of the only thing I really heard about, Japan and World War II was Pearl Harbor
hmm
and the imperialistic, um, the imperialistic nature of Japan's military. That's really all I learned. I didn't learn about 731. I didn't learn about, Hong Kong invasion. I didn't learn about any of that stuff. And but go ahead. Where were you going
Yeah,
with that?
so for listeners, education, Unit 731 was Japanese military biological warfare center where they use human guinea pigs to develop their biological warfare items, if you will. And it was a horrendous way of doing science and luring people in there and using them as human guinea pigs and killing tens of thousands of people. That's just one little chapter of a large organization of Imperial Japan that basically had systematic rape and slaughter as part of its strategy. Nazi Germany, for all the horrific aspects of what we know about Nazi Germany, they were only, quote unquote, only able to slaughter 11 million people, 6 million of them Jews, over 3 million Russian POWs. And then you have, gypsies, homosexuals, and so on. And they were systematic in what they were doing. But by and large, the normal German soldier was fighting. Uh, Part of his mandate was not genocide and
Right.
slaughter. That was a lot of the Einsatzgruppen, the SS, and so on. It was a small organization that was doing most of the mass killing. Whereas in Japan, it was the entire military. They were all in on it, and they did, if you read Rudolf Höss, who was the commandant of Auschwitz, his memoir, he documents many men suffering from what they were doing, committing suicide, alcoholism, wanting to get in other units. I interviewed a woman who had a husband that was a guard at Auschwitz, and he suffered so much he would rather go fight the Russians than stay there. In Japan, you don't have this problem. So, a lot of people know about the rape of Nanking and an operation from Shanghai taking over Nanking, which is the capital of Chiang Kai-shek's National Chinese country at that time. It was about 150 miles to get from Shanghai to Nanking. And this operation that happened in 37 and 38 basically slaughtered 300,000 civilians and raped most likely more than 100,000 women. And the Japanese enjoyed doing this. They laughed at doing this. And this is just one example of many. You can say the rape of Beijing when they took over Beijing, the rape of Hong Kong, the rape of Indonesia, the rape of Vietnam. I could go on and on. And so, what I did with this book, my most recent World War II book, Japan's Holocaust, is I literally did a 25-year study on this. Especially, I started this study because I asked my famous Japanese history professor at Yale University, James Crowley, right when Iris Chang's book, The Rape of Nanking, came out, the journalist who wrote about this in the 90s. I said, why doesn't anybody know about the larger aspect of all the genocide? He's like,
Yeah.
well, nobody's really just gone into it. You would think a basic question, has
Yeah.
anybody put together all the mass slaughter of Japan? Nobody had. So that's how I fell into this subject matter. And to give people some numbers, at least 30 million people were slaughtered. Most of those were Chinese.
Wow.
And they did it continually all the way until the atomic bombs were dropped. In fact, one good argument for the bombs, in a line of many good arguments, was that every month we delayed bringing the war to an end, you had over 100,000 people under Japan Dominion dying systematically, mostly from starvation that the Japanese did. So I felt that was a huge hole in World War II historiography that had not been done, and that's how I fell into that. And I've gotten death threats from Japanese for it. I can't find a
Wow.
Japanese translator. Nobody has courage over there to translate it. It is coming
Really?
out in Korea and Chinese, but it's really hit a nerve over in Japan because they have ignored this history. They
Yes.
have refused to deal with it. To put it in perspective, there are thousands of monuments and hundreds of research and museum institutions in Germany dedicated to the Holocaust. There's not one monument in Japan to the mass murder that they did. Not
Wow.
one. Japan has only paid 1 billion in reparations to the victims. They killed 30 million people. Germany has paid 90 billion. So Japan is
Wow.
a disgrace as far as when it's coming to being honest with your history and dealing with your sins of your past, if you will. So I was really driven to go to China and Japan, do research in the archives, and after 25 years study and amassing hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of note cards, I wrote up my book, and Sir Andrew Roberts endorsed it, one of the foremost World War II historians of our age. So.
That's awesome. What that's unbelievable. I always wonder like why we don't hear things about, the Japanese atrocities that or the atrocities the Japanese Imperial Army committed. I always wonder that. And then I also take a look at United States history since World War II. Our military operates a lot similar to the way Nazi Germany's military operated back then. That's the way it operates currently, like the blitzkrieg tactics and stuff like that. We do a lot of that stuff now,
Yep.
and it's the research that was gained by Joseph Mengele. We use a lot of that research currently, and a lot of the research from Unit 731. And I think it was more so that those lives weren't lost in vain, is how they
Mhm.
justified it, but also so we don't have to repeat the atrocities and ultimately take away lessons. I'm not really sure. I tried to dig into why the United States government helped cover up the Japanese atrocities, and I can't come. There's no
Well,
logical conclusion that I have.
you've just thrown a lot of stuff at me, so let me try to answer them very, very, very quickly. So, first one, why do we not know more about Japan's atrocities? Unlike Nazi Germany, where you had a reservoir of Jewish scholars in England, Australia, America, Canada, who after the war wanted to figure out what was going on, and the Allies forced the Germans during the Nuremberg trials to open up their archives. And these people, especially under the banner of Raoul Hilberg, one of the foremost first Holocaust historians to really get something out in the 60s, you don't have anything like that going on in China, where most of the killing was done because Mao Tse-tung took over Chiang Kai-shek's national
Yeah,
China in 1948. And Mao Tse-tung was even more of a brutal killer than
yes,
Hirohito or Hitler. In fact, some people believe that in his 50-year reign, he reigned a lot longer than Hirohito or Hitler. He slaughtered 70 million people. So it's very hard for China to point the finger at Japan when they're doing the same thing to their own people and they have an oppressive
interesting.
totalitarian regime. And also, all the documents, a lot of them were taken over by the communists and oppressed from being put in the open because they were nationalist documents. And a lot of the intelligentsia was killed because that was the communist mandate. So you cut off
Yes,
the head of the intellectual community, and it's hard to get this documented. Also, Japan was not opening up its archives after the Tokyo trials. They really try to suppress a lot of the stuff. So that's some of the main reasons why we don't know about the Holocaust that Japan perpetrated, the mass murder. Getting to Blitzkrieg maneuver warfare, yes, that has influenced America policy. In fact, in the Marine Corps, which I'm a Marine Corps officer, they use so many German terminologies like Auftragstaktik, mission statements, which means you tell a person what you want him to get done, but then he decides on the ground how to do it. You
yes,
don't micromanage. That's a German thing. Maneuver warfare, Bewegungskrieg, which is the German term. That was really a good thing that the Germans developed, and we studied that a lot and incorporated it into our military. You are right about that. Now, getting to Joseph Mengele's research, we don't use any of that research. They looked into it, but it's all bogus. You know, how to turn people's eyes blue, how to create the master
really,
race,
really.
how to look at.
I thought it was more like so they would take these not volunteers, but they would take these people and like put them into aircraft and take them really high up into the stratosphere and until they freeze. And at that
Oh,
point,
okay. So the freezing, that was not Mingala. You had some of the freezing experiments that were done. And now it may have been Mingala, but from the research that I've done, he was more interested in looking at twins,
okay,
phenotypical traits, and so on. They did do some high altitude experiments and freezing experiments in Dachau and other places as well. I'm sure they did some similar experiments in Auschwitz, but I don't think that was under Joseph Mingala. A lot of the research was fairly, I mean, we didn't need to do the research on the human to know that a person
okay,
only had 3 or 4 minutes in a cold
yeah,
ocean before he succumbs to hypothermia. I mean, a lot of it was, you know, very un-Germanic, if you will. It was very bogus. Now, on the other side of the coin, though, you are right with the research the Japanese were doing. Their research using human guinea pigs was
yeah,
not
they
how
were
to
doing
create
like
the master
vivisections and
race.
stuff.
It was very good research. And Ishii, who was in charge of Unit 731, was basically given immunity by General MacArthur to turn over his research. And that was disgraceful. MacArthur, I think, was a horrible person and commander on many levels. He did do a pretty good job of organizing Japan and bringing, our constitution and democratic values to Japan. I have to give him that. But he was a pathetic commander in the field. He was an egomaniac, and then he did something horrible. We could have still gotten the research without giving immunity to
Yeah.
General Ishii. But we gave immunity to him, and we did use that research because Japan had developed the most sophisticated system of using biological warfare than any other nation. They couldn't control it. A lot of times they would use bubonic plague against the Chinese, but
Yeah.
then with wind conditions and weather conditions, it would blow back on their own troops and so on. So they had a hard time containing it, but they did use it an awful lot and killed tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of people using it. And they had developed a bubonic strain that could kill you within literally 24 hours. And how they would do
Wow.
this to use it in war is they would infect a whole bunch of fleas with this bubonic strain, bubonic plague strain, put them in a clay bomb, and then drop this clay bomb with a parachute over a village or a town they wanted to kill. It would break open, the fleas would go out, infect the people, and within, 48 hours, most of them were dead. But here again, they had a hard time controlling this. But we recognized that it was good science and that we could potentially use this against the Soviet Union or communist China later. So we made a Faustian trade-off of working with these Japanese scientists, using the research and incorporating it in our own, although a lot of that research was gained by killing people. So you are right on that one. So those
Yeah.
are the four issues you brought out. I just wanted to address them very quickly.
In my opinion, I think I don't I'm not quite sure why the cover up, but I think that using the data was a good thing because like that means that we ultimately don't have to sacrifice those lives again to get that researcher to get that data.
And I think
And
some people had that rationale at that time.
yeah,
As like it's
yeah,
there, we wouldn't have used this technique in America, but now that it's there, let's use it to protect Americans and save lives. I think there was
absolutely.
that rationale. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't I see there's a rise in anti-Semitism. It's gotten worse over the years. I never really paid much attention to it until let's see, probably 20 2021 2022 somewhere in there. I wasn't really paying much attention to it until it hit home. Um, my kid came home from school and it said I can't remember what he said, but I had deemed it anti-Semitic at the time, and I was like, why would you say something like that? Where did you hear that at? Stuff like when I was in high school, it was like, oh, that's Jewish, or that's like we would make stereotypical statements to describe other things and not Jews. And
Hmm.
my kid had said something that I had deemed anti-Semitic, and I was like, well, listen, man, we've got to have a talk. We've got to have a talk about this. Why do you say those things? Why do you feel this way? And I just kind of tried to, I kind of tried to educate him without showing him the worst of the worst. But then I interviewed a Holocaust survivor,
Mhm.
and I cried the entire 2.5 hours I was talking to him, and I had him watch that video, and I was like, here, just watch this, and you can see why I feel the way I do. It's a very strong feeling that I have, and I'm not sure how it got to be that way,
What was
other
the
than
video
doing
of?
my video of interviewing the the World War II Holocaust survivor.
Oh, oh yeah.
So he
Mhm.
survived
Oh, you had your
Auschwitz, and
son watch that video.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well, I don't even know if he watched it, but I asked him to. But
Mhm.
for me, I have such a physical reaction to anti-Semitism. It really makes me angry. It really makes not only sad but angry.
Mhm.
And it's gotten progressively worse over the years, over the last few years. What do you think that? Why do you think that is? Where do you think that comes from?
Well,
Because I know
it's
historically
something I've
Jews
studied
have always
for
been.
yeah, I've studied for 25 years. So, one aspect of the problem with anti-Semitism is that we got 2 billion Muslims in the world. Many of them are extremely intolerant. They don't believe in women's rights, gay rights, religious freedom, and in their books, you have the Jews demonized. Just like Christianity with Paul or Luther going to the Jews and saying, hey, we have the right sauce. And the Jews are like, no, we don't want this religion. Then instead of them responding with love and kindness, they respond with anger and hatred and so on. And Muhammad did the same thing. He went to the Jews and they said, "Hey, we also don't want this. This is not us, and it does not fulfill prophecy, and it's not part of our religious tradition." And he turns on them. And so you have, a whole country, Iran, preaching the absolute destruction of Israel and genocide of all Jews. Hamas, which is a proxy of Iran, is also in their charter has a mandate to not only kill all Israelis, but to kill Jews everywhere. So a big problem with anti-Semitism is Islam, and it is a horrid religion as far as creating peace with Jews in general,
Yeah,
especially
and
now.
they say they're the most peaceful.
Well, no, they're not. I mean, their mandates in the Marine Corps. We had a flippant kind of way of saying, being very careful with Muslims in general. But we had this saying, it's like, okay, there's the radical Muslim who wants to cut off your head, and then there's the moderate Muslim who wants the radical Muslim to cut off your head.
Yeah,
Now you can't generalize. There are some well-meaning Muslims who are enlightened that realize that this is not the way for everybody. They don't adhere to strict Sharia law, but I hate to say that I think they're the minority because where
right,
are they when people are doing these horrible things? Why aren't the societies rising up against ISIS, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and Hezbollah saying, "Stop it"? This is not who
right.
we are. You don't see those people. And
Yeah,
Iran was an entire nation run by a religious nut job. So anti-Semitism is part and parcel. The reason why we have it is because we have so many Muslims in the world that adhere to Jew hatred. We also have a problem that it's still lingering is Christian anti-Semitism. We have to realize in World War II, seven of the dictators of Europe were all Christian. Six of them were Catholic. None of them excommunicated. Mussolini and Hitler, the first treaties they did with a sovereign nation was with the Vatican to
no kid.
legitimize the Lateran
I didn't
Accords.
know that.
Yeah,
I,
Lateran
I
Accords in 1922 with Mussolini legitimize his rule. Pope Pius XI. And then with Pope Pius XI again, the Reichs concorded in 1933 with Hitler legitimizing his rule in all Catholic eyes. And at the time, both Lutheran and Catholic preachings were that Jews are guilty of deicide, killing God. This is in the New Testament, but they really highlighted it. And that they're not only the Jews at the time that were working with the Roman government, because the Romans actually crucified him, killed him, but it's Jews in perpetuity, all Jews everywhere, and that they're the firstborn of Satan and so on. So you have a lot of
really.
anti-Semitism coming from Christianity. What's recent anti-Semitism, like we see at Harvard University, Also, at my former prep school, Phillips Exeter Academy, I was horrified to see teachers.
Yes.
You have these two teachers at Exeter, Carbonell and Mondi, supporting Hamas at a prep school. And what's interesting is they are supporting a terrorist organization that kills and rapes people, and they're using these terminologies from from the river to the sea, which means wipe
Yeah.
out all of Israel. You see it at Harvard, and you have Claudine Gay, incapable, who was the president of Harvard, incapable of denouncing genocide against Jews, that was a bad thing. And then what's interesting is you have this DEI movement, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that has this weird mandate that's saying, okay, who has power? People with money. Who mostly has all that money and so on? It's white people. So they demonize this white privilege and whatnot. But then they take it a next step further. They go into an anti-Semitic trope. Who has the most money who's white? Jews. And
Yeah,
so
I
you're
can't. I've
seeing,
heard that recently.
ironically, shockingly, from an organization that when I first heard about it several years ago, I thought, as a Holocaust historian, yeah, we want diversity, we want inclusion, we want equity. Now we're seeing that actually quite often a lot of African Americans are coming forward and spewing anti-Semitic trifle. I can't believe I'm seeing this. They should be allies, but
Yes.
yet they're going after the Jews and they're creating incredible anti-Semitism. We're seeing it now and seeing it in the admissions of a lot of these elite universities that they're, discriminating against Asians and whites and then Jews. Uh, and so I can't believe I'm seeing anti-Semitism in America at the level, like at Harvard University
Yes.
and a lot of universities. They in Harvard, there was a guy that attacked a Jew during one of the pro-Palestinian protests. He was a graduate student at the Divinity School. He was brought up for charges. He was in our legal system. They allowed him to graduate, and not only did he graduate from Harvard, but the Harvard Divinity School hired him back.
Wow.
And it's an African American woman who runs the divinity school, and this is an African American student, and they were preaching, and she's on record of preaching, support for what Hamas has done. I can't believe these people are in power. You know,
So
it,
is this something similar to what we saw in the lead up to the Holocaust in Germany?
in some respects, yes. You have this in Nazi Germany, with this DEI movement, especially going after Jews and classifying things according to race.
Yeah.
They're talking about white, Caucasian, brown, black. We're all Americans and we're part of one race, the human race. That should be the focus. And splitting people and dividing people and creating hatred, which DEI has done more than anything else that I've seen, especially against the Jews,
Right.
is mind-numbing to me. And that's what Hitler did. Hitler came up and started saying, we're not Germans. There are Aryans, and there's a subset of Aryans. And then there's the Jews, and then there's the Untermenschen, the subhumans. And we got to get them out of school. We got to get them out of the society. We got to deport them, and then eventually we got to kill them.
Right.
So, it's interesting. Niemöller, who was a U-boat commander in World War One and was a Protestant minister, the first 2 years of Hitler's reign, he did support him. He's like, get back German power, get rid of the Versailles Treaty, unite Germany because it was split in two from the Versailles Treaty. But he started seeing the evil on there, on the horizon. And he went against it and he developed the confessional church that Bonhoeffer was part of as well, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Well, at the end of the war, they asked him, how could this happen? He said, well, when they came for the socialists, I wasn't a socialist, so I didn't stand up. When they came for the gays, I wasn't gay, so I didn't stand up. When they came for the Jews, I wasn't Jewish, I didn't stand up. When they came for me, it was too late. So the lesson here is that when you start seeing an organization like DEI and Harvard for that matter preaching racial doctrine and anti-Semitism, you gotta get rid of it immediately.
Especially like
And
they get
because it will
billions of
grow
dollars.
into, I'm
They
sorry.
get they get billions of dollars in tax funding too. That's That's what's worse about it to me, is because they've taken these institutions and they've completely turned them backwards in ideology from where we used to be. Now, I attribute that to ideological subversion from the 90s. When Russia fell, um, there was before Russia fell, there was this infiltration of or not Russia, but the Soviets. Before the Soviet Union fell, there was this infiltration of Soviet um, political figures or KGB agents into the United States. And slowly they started working their way into our institutions and subverting those institutions. But I never once connected like Islam to that. I never really paid much attention. And it's kind of crazy, like looking at the UK today and seeing how radical that the other side is in the UK, and then it's coming here, and I see people like Zoran Mandani. That guy, that guy's scary. He comes out and he smiles real big, and people like him, and he's telling people like, we're going to give you free shit, and a bunch of it, and it never works out the way they want it to. But then I see all the political and religious hatred he spews. And it worries me. It worries me not because he got to where he is, but who's next? Who's next in our political line in our politics here in the United States? How far is this going to go before people stand up? And I'm not advocating for violence by any means, but what I'm saying is, like, maybe we don't vote those people in the first place. Maybe we do a better job of trying to get people to understand what all this is, and how in fact they spread that hate is they work their way into our institutions, they work their way into our systems and spread hate in those systems.
Yeah. Yeah, Mondani, we just got all this information that the love of his life, his wife, was praising October
Yes.
7th, rape, slaughter, and genocide toward Jews. And then he was on record saying from the river to the sea and Antifada and so on. He's a racist himself. Now, he's playing the game of saying the right things. And when you study Hitler early on, he was saying some of the nice things. Now, he did write in Mein Kampf pretty clearly what he was going after. But, like, for example, in 1936 with the Olympics, they took out all the anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
They took the banners away. He knew how to play the game. That's what Mandani is doing. And he was raised as a Muslim, and he was raised with that intolerance. Why would you marry a woman who would praise genocide and rape, and still sing her praises instead of condemning it? Saying
Yeah.
it's wrong. We're in
What was
therapy.
really
I have her
wild to
talking
me,
to a rabbi. This was not who we are.
yeah,
So,
what
and
was
it's
really
social.
wild to me to see all the protests and everything here in the United States and college campuses nationwide shouting death to Israel, death to America. Are you kidding me? What, how is, like, I understand things are legal in the United States, but maybe, just maybe, we stand up and give some data and history, and we talk to people instead of just turning our backs and allowing it to happen. And God bless, like, not to bring this into politics or American politics, but Donald Trump, as many negatives as there are about Donald Trump, there's a lot of positives too. And that's one of the things that I really loved about him, was that he came out in defense of the Jews. He came out in defense of the white folks. He came out in defense of the brown folks. He's a polarizing figure, but he's not wrong.
That, and it will be interesting what the historians do. I mean, there's some, horrific things that he has done, and then there's some really positive things. And people, on both sides need to realize we need to have that balance. The historians will get that right eventually. It'll be interesting what they write. Getting to the protests and where those anti-Semitism come from, I think part and parcel, especially what we see in England, it's because of the allowing Muslim immigrants. A lot of
Yeah.
these protests on the campus are these students that we see that are riling people up, that are Muslim, that are not American. And we're seeing a huge backlash in Germany, in Sweden, in England.
Yes.
They're saying these people are not good citizens. They don't embrace gay rights, religious freedom. They don't denounce anti-Semitism. You don't want these people in your society. And for all the extremism of a Muslim ban, I think if England could rewind the clock, Sweden, Germany, France, and America, we would say, no, you've proven that you are not
Yes.
good material. You do not assimilate. You do not embrace democratic rights. And once again, no religious freedom, no gay rights, and we don't want you. And we need to be more draconian and be more honest to stop with this political correctness. It's not Islamic phobia. When
It's funny.
Islam
Political
says I
correctness
should
actually
die,
comes,
yeah,
the political correctness, that term actually comes from those type of, it comes from ideological subversion.
yeah,
That's exactly what it is.
Ricky, you're absolutely right, and we need to call it as it is. When somebody says they want to kill me or kill my cousin because he's gay, or kill me because I believe in democratic ideals, then it's a fear that's not irrational. It's a real fear, and we need to really start calling it what it is. And I think the phenomenon of Trump, one reason is we're seeing affirmative action in many respects does not work. It's discrimination.
Right.
And when I was in the Marine Corps and you have your buddies on your shoulder, I'm not asking if somebody's gay or black or Catholic or Jewish.
Yes.
He's a Marine and
Right.
I can trust him. And so it's a meritocracy. He's earned that title. He's trained with me. He's an American. And I believe two good institutions in America that are just wonderful is the military and sports, because there's
Yes.
meritocracy. I mean, we're not talking about affirmative action in the NBA or the NFL. And we're also not talking about it in many respects in the military, although it was creeping in. You
Right.
know, we want the best and the brightest and the most athletic in these organizations, and that's how society should be in general, whether you're a physicist or whatnot. It's interesting when they did away with the affirmative action at MIT. I heard, and these are just the numbers that were given. You can get on the internet. Asian enrollment like doubled.
Yep.
African American enrollment decreased by like 50%, and Caucasian enrollment increased like by 20%, you know. And so here again, if the best and the brightest are Asian, so be it. You want that in the military and in positions of power and whatnot. And that's why the SCOTUS ruling, our Supreme Court actually ruled that this was not good. And people like Claudine Gay, who was a horrible leader, and I can't believe she's a plagiarist. She was the president of the university. They kicked her out basically, but they kept her on. But it's people like that you're seeing that we're trying to subvert
Yes.
these federal mandates of how you keep a healthy society, and that is meritocracy. And by and large, America has usually always been that way. Now, granted, we have some really bad history with the Jim Crow laws and with slavery and so on. But we have an institution that can course correct and do it
Yes.
very quickly. Unlike Islamic countries that still have slavery on the books, they haven't denounced it, and they were some of the biggest slave traders, and they've never, asked forgiveness for that. So coming full circle, I think where is the anti-Semitism coming in these groups? Coming full circle back to looking at these protests at the universities and out in the streets. A lot of times it's Muslims and it's foreigners,
Yeah.
and get rid of them.
And if you trace back the funding for all of this stuff, it either goes back to Iran or China or Russia.
And that's what I was shocked by from the reports I've heard on CNN and Fox News, and the both too extreme from news agencies. But I've heard it from both pundits on there that a lot of this money supporting a lot of this kind of radicalism support for Palestine and Gaza and so on is coming from Islamic countries. And what's interesting is a lot of people who are supporting Gaza and Hamas don't realize that if they would go there, they get their heads cut off. They first
Yeah,
get raped
exactly.
probably, and then get
Yes.
their heads cut off.
Yes.
Um,
I've told been many, many, many people that I'm like, if you took one step into Palestine or Iran, you'd be dead. You'd be dead. They'd throw you off the closest building.
Yeah,
And
these gays for Palestine, gays for Hamas. I'm like, don't you know they throw
that's
them
an
off
oxymoron.
buildings to kill when they're
Yes.
gay? I mean, and in Islam, it's against the law to be gay. I mean, it's just sociological suicide to
Yes,
me that
yes.
what these people are
Suicidal
committing.
empathy. That's a good term that I've heard to use to describe what's happening inside the United States specifically. And the UK, it's happened a lot there too. But suicidal empathy, we feel so bad, we feel so guilty about like for a past that we don't even know that happened, you know. But we allow other folks to make us feel so bad about certain groups that we're willing to vote against our own interests to perpetuate the lies and mistreatment of 90% of the population. I think it's ridiculous how many people are like, well, we should feel bad for all these people. And I'm like, for instance, the October 7th attacks. We should feel bad for the Palestinians. No, they stole people. They came into Israel and they raped people. They killed people, you know, children, women included, and they stole people. You don't, and whatever happened to the United States is like we don't negotiate with terrorists. Like whatever happened to that? Because like,
Mhm.
listen, those people couldn't. You can't negotiate with them. This is what's going to happen if you negotiate with them. They will think that this is how they win. This is how they get their way. They will come steal your people, and then you will deal with them. You will negotiate with them, and then they've won. They've won. And so you don't negotiate with people like that. And then listening to people saying free Palestine from the river to the sea, those it was just it pissed me off because I was watching CNN the day that happened. And I was watching CNN televise all of these things that were going on in Israel. And then the very next day, free Palestine.
Yeah, it's mind-numbing to me. You know, most of these people have not been to Israel. Almost all of them have never been to
Right.
Gaza. I've been to both, you know. And you know, Israel is the only Middle Eastern country that has gay rights, religious freedom. You have blacks, whites, Arabs, you know, working together. You have over 1 million Arabs. I mean, if they wanted quote unquote genocide, which some people, one of my fellow World War II historians, Omar Bartov, has gone insane. He's saying it's genocide. You know, I'm like, you know, are you an idiot?
Yeah,
Because
and
you know,
that's where
genocide
that's
is
my
a
argument
mandate when you
against.
want to kill everybody of that
Right.
ethnicity or whatnot. And if that was the case, they would kill all the 1 million Palestinian Arabs that are in their country. Many of them, Muslims, are in the military, the Bedouin and the Druzim. And some of the best snipers that I was around when I was in the Israeli army before the Marine Corps were Druze. They were
Yeah.
wonderful Israeli soldiers. And so people don't realize that, you know, they can have their freedoms that they embrace in democratic countries in Israel, but if they go to most Muslim countries,
Yeah.
they would be thrown in jail, raped, killed. And it seems like rape is a huge thing in the Muslim country. I mean, we saw it all the time in Afghanistan. Uh,
Yes.
they have a nation of pedophiles, basically. You have you know, pedophilia is rampant everywhere. And they use rape as part of their tactics when they capture people and so on, just like the Hamas people did when they
Right.
captured people in Israel. These are not people we want to be negotiating with. We should have unconditional surrender, and their leaders should be killed. Period. You know, that's what World War II teaches us. You cannot deal with fascism and intolerance with logical debate. It
Right.
doesn't work.
Right.
You know, and religious fanaticism. You know, I'm sorry, you cannot deal with religious fanatics. You got to kill them. You know, and Nazism, for all of its weird philosophies,
Well, Brian, the only thing they understand is violence. That's really legitimately the only thing they understand is violence.
Yeah, you
And
point out,
that's
that's the only language they understand. Absolutely.
I so for me, I like I know I hate to keep dragging politics into this, but it's all connected, in my opinion. I see a lot of evil, Brian. I see a lot of evil. I don't want to make this a left versus right thing because it's on both sides, and we just we had just discussed Christians being against Jews and Christian anti-Semitism. So it is on both sides, and that's such a radical statement in itself. Both sides in today's political climate, if you say the word, the phrase "both sides," you're a fence sitter, you're the bad guys. But the truth is, 80% of us are right here in the middle with me. I'm not far left. I'm not far right. What I'm basically trying to understand the world around me, and there's so much extremism, and I see a lot of evil coming out on the left, and it's kind of surprising because I've heard my entire life, that the Nazis were, far right, and then you go back in the history, and they were just far extreme. They were extreme. The Nazi Party, they were just extreme. They were right and left, and
Yeah,
it's very crazy.
you bring up something that is kind of shocked me. Like you kind of always feel like the anti-Semitism and radicalism you're going to get from the right, the neo-Nazis, for
Yes.
example, and that it's come so much from Democrats. I mean, that you have Congresswoman Tlaib from Democrat that has been actually sanctioned both by Democrats and Republicans for her anti-Semitism and her uh, anti-Israel and hate speech. That she's actually a leader in our country is disgraceful, and
Yeah.
Omar as well. That we have these type of leaders, and that is coming from the left where usually it was the party of compassion, the Democrats and whatnot.
Yeah.
But now we got these nut jobs like Crockett in Texas. You got Bush. You got then AOC, and then you got Tlaib and Omar. It's an embarrassment. It
Yeah.
really is, and that these people are not more ridiculed. And then when they're sanctioned by the both houses, when Tlaib was sanctioned, and there's only been like 20 congresswomen that have ever been or men ever sanctioned in our nation's history, they should remove that person.
Yes. Yes. Ilhan Omar, that's an interesting one for me because I don't understand how she's still a congressperson. I don't understand how that's like so I don't know if it's true or not, but there's allegations that she married her brother to get him into the country, and the fraud and everything. Like now she's worth some $30 million. And no offense to any Somali people out there, I know there's probably smart ones, but like the country as a whole only has like a 60 IQ score for the whole country, and on average. And I'm blown away by the fact that we know these things about Ilhan Omar, but she still got her position. She's
Mhm.
still allowed to say anti-American rhetoric. And that's what bothers me the most, anti-American rhetoric. I am such a true patriotic guy. I love the United States. I believe in American exceptionalism. I'm one of those type
Yep,
of
I
people
agree
that
with you.
I absolutely believe in American exceptionalism. Exceptionalism. Here this is a 250-year-old experiment here, right?
Mhm.
And how I tell people like American exceptionalism doesn't have anything to do with I'm better than you or you're better than me. It has everything to do with how we got here as a country. How
Yep.
we got here as a country is we had to fight for our freedoms. We had to fight for our constitution, and that is baked into every American because it's the attitude, it's the national attitude, don't tread on me kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so I'm a very big believer in American exceptionalism and how people like Ilhan Omar are allowed to keep the positions that they have and say the anti-American rhetoric. it's mind blowing to me. Like she's not been fined, she's not been censured, she's not. Nobody's even had a discussion with her about these things.
Yeah,
It's
I
just
agree. I
mind-boggling.
agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of pushback in both parties, from what I understand, but obviously more from the Republicans. You have this foreigner from a really bad part. I never heard about the IQ. I just know in general
Now,
they have
I'm going to
hardly.
preface. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah,
That's
they have a
I've
low
heard that.
level of education, and
Yeah,
from buddies of mine or people I've talked to, I shouldn't call them buddies that were stationed over there. Black Hawk Down. These are not people you want in your nation, and we're seeing that in Minnesota. Somalis don't make good citizens from the research that we're seeing in general. It's not like people, a lot of times Nigerians make very good citizens. Somalis make horrible citizens, we're finding out, and with the fraud and everything else. And they make horrible leaders that we're seeing
yeah,
with Omar. And I'm like with you. I'm like, if you're an Olympian, if you're a representative, you got to look at how great this nation is, especially in respects to history. I love what Winston Churchill said. He was half American. A lot of people don't realize his mother, Yinny, was an
I didn't know
American.
that.
Yeah, and Winston Churchill said, I'm paraphrasing to some degree, but he says American democracy is the worst form of government except for all the rest.
There you
And
go.
there's so much to be proud of in what we have done, giving democracy to Japan and Germany, saving the world from these two, genocidal regimes that had already, caused the deaths of 60 million people. Uh, all the stuff that we've done with other nations and trying to help them. Iraq and Afghanistan may have been misguided, but we try to make the society better. And maybe it'll have some, benefits, dividends later on with Afghanistan. It looks like Iraq is better than having the dictator Saddam
Right.
there. Taking out
Yes.
the dictator in Venezuela, taking out the dictator in Iran, these are good things.
I actually talked to people that live in Iraq, and they say it's a lot better now than what it was.
Yeah, it wasn't perfect, but America does more good than it does harm. And compared to what, Somali or
Yeah.
what, Syria or Lebanon, these are pathetic nations and they
Right.
should be ridiculed. And people should, if they get the chance to come here from those countries, they should be so thankful. And you see incredible ingratitude
Yes.
and
Yes.
racism from Omar. She is an
Yes.
anti-Semite. She should not be in government.
I agree. I absolutely agree. So I just looked that up, the statistic. The average Somalia has historically been assigned an estimated average IQ somewhere in the range of 67 or 68. And when talking about the
Wow.
fraud in Minnesota, yeah, it's awful. When talking about the fraud in Minnesota specifically, but it's everywhere.
Hmm.
Um, I just I like I make this joke. I'm like, why are we surprised by this? I mean, what are Somalis most known for? Being pirates. That's
Yeah.
that's what Somalis are known for, is being pirates. You can't drive a ship by their country lest they'll come out and harass you or kill you. Captain Phillips, that whole thing.
Yeah.
And then but you have this rise of people in the United States that, oh, Somali's great, Somalia is awesome. And I'm old enough to remember when those statements were not true at all, and I'm sure they're not now. But we don't talk about these things anymore. We don't talk about and here's how bad things have gotten worldwide. um, Germany and Japan are both rearming, and that should make folks nervous.
Well, on the flip side, I would say this. Japan is a good partner with us. It's a democratic country. We've given it its constitution. It has proven time and time again to be a good ally to us. And if they want to take it to the next step to protect themselves against a horrible regime under Xi Jinping, China, I think we need to embrace that. I don't think we need to be scared of that. Germany's Bundeswehr right now is 100 and about 160,000 people. There are more people in the Marine Corps, and we have more aircraft, I've heard, than the German military, Air Force,
Right.
the Marine Corps, that the Marine Corps theoretically could take over Germany. So Germany has a nation of 90 million people. and they have only 160,000 in their military, and they got Russia on the doorstep, and they preach this ni vita, never again, the Holocaust. Yet when they've had Rwanda, when they've had Yugoslavia, when they've had Ukraine, they don't do very much. They're bleeding sheep and pansies. It is about time that the world says, okay, you've gone too extreme of being weak. You need to grow
Yes.
a backbone. You need to embrace, von Moltke, Schlieffen, Clausewitz, these great German military thinkers in your tradition, and you need to be tough. And when you
Yes.
say nie wieder, never again, you need to back it up whenever you see genocide, that you stop it
Yeah.
instead of,
Remember your past, and we don't want anybody to go back there. We don't want any genocides to happen. We I fall short of wanting to spread democracy around the world. I don't think that's the answer either. But but I believe that, like, the American way of policing the world, if you will. I don't think we police the world, but it's it seems like it's necessary at times. Like right now, we're in a conflict with Iran, and I can't I can't take anybody seriously that is against it, that doesn't want intervention us there. I can't take them seriously. And then there's this whole trope now that Israel drug us into war. And I'm like, we've been at war with Iran since, like 79. We've technically been at war, and we're still at war with North Korea as well. And I can't take these people seriously for those reasons, because they can't think critically and understand, yes, this is a shitty thing to do, but it's also necessary.
yeah, well, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the death and destruction all spread out throughout the world is because of Iran.
Yes,
It's not because it's
Hamas
what
and,
they're
and
doing
their
on their
proxies.
borders. It's
Yes.
Hamas, it's Hezbollah. This is not a good nation. We should be taking out nations like that when we say never again. We cannot allow a religious nation like Iran to ever have a nuclear warhead, and we need to take out dictators. One thing that World War II once again has shown us is that when you have a fascist, radical dictator, which the Ayatollahs are, you kill them. You
Yeah.
get rid of them. It makes the world a better
But
place.
here's
Had
one thing
Truman
though,
done a
Brian.
better job of doing this against Mao Tse-tung, the world would be a better place. Had he also done a better job against Kim in North Korea at that time, the world would be a better place if we had a united Korea. So history shows us that when you have these radical regimes, taking them out is a good thing. So I agree with you. I think what's happening here with taking out the Ayatollahs and the religious nut jobs in the Iranian Guard is a good thing, and telling the world, especially the Islamic world, we're tired of radicalism. We're tired of you terrorists. Get your societies in order. People around these organizations and so on, rise up and take them out, or we're going to start bombing your cities. You know.
Well, here's the thing, Brian. I've never heard the phrase international law so many times than I have in the last 2 weeks as well. And international law seems to be hamstringing us in this, like, if we need to get rid of dictators, what do we do about international law? I think so. I don't believe in international law. Who's going to enforce that shit? It's us. That's who enforces international law. A lot of people talk about the UN. Now, they were okay, and then China joined the UN. So
Well,
there's
I guess
Russia.
on this. Excuse me for
Go
interrupting.
ahead.
I
Go
think
ahead.
I'm tracking with you. With international law, I mean, the amazing thing about Israel and America is that we do hold some universal truths and humanitarian focuses, which we don't target civilians, which
Right.
Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, that's all they do is
Right.
target civilians. So international law is saying, okay, you're not going after the civilian, you're going after the military and leadership, infrastructure. That's something that international law, I think everybody can get behind. Now, international law can be very nebulous. Who drew the first punch? Well, definitely Iran did,
Right.
and they've continually done so. They've been killing Americans for the last couple of decades, and their proxy groups have. And they've been arming these groups that have been killing Americans. So take them out. So international law would support us there. It's how you interpret that law to some degree. And I think to some degree, there has to be a new book of international law that needs to start dealing with Islamic radicalism,
Yeah.
and how the gloves need to come off. And if societies continue to spawn these nations, that we don't respect that society at all. If the people can't rise up and take out these people themselves, we're going to do it for you. And then you better learn how not to repeat that same type of government.
So what about places like Venezuela? I don't think that had anything to do with Iran.
You're looking.
I also view it as something that needed to happen. I think that we need to get our South America under control. I actually think we need to get the Western Hemisphere under control
Well,
myself.
my
But
my working 10,000 foot view is when you look at any countries under Islamic law or Napoleonic or Spanish law, it's a mess. It's corruption. It's a
right,
mess. I mean, Venezuela was giving a lot of oil to China and Iran. That's kind of interesting strategic thing that we're cutting off a lot of the oil supply to China.
yeah,
And we've been telling them for decades, stop stealing our stuff. They
yes,
are a nation of thieves
and
intellectually.
that
They still
pisses
have,
me off too. I'm
yeah,
so anti CCP, man.
yeah, and they are a big threat to Japan and democracy in Asia. So taking over Venezuela has an unintended consequences of doing that. Venezuela was, the drug. We should be bombing Mexico, and we just took out our intel helped them take out El Mencho.
Yeah,
And we should be taking out a lot of the other cartels. 60,000 Americans died from fentanyl. Fentanyl made in China and then funneled through with the cartels through our southern
absolutely.
border.
And it
So,
is absolutely a weapon. You know what Iran's doing with fentanyl? So
no.
Iran's working on trying to aerosol it.
Okay. Well, hopefully we will shut that down. But, when you ask me, was it a good thing getting involved in South America and so on? I mean, South America is a mess in general. And I think, we need to call them to account. If you can't start doing this, we're going to do it. And Mexico is a pathetic nation.
I
And they
agree.
have not been able to control the cartels. Venezuela was supporting a lot of this as well. So I think getting involved and starting to send a message, we're going to sink your ships, we're going to sink your submarines, we're going to start taking out your cartel members and kill the people, and then do better education in America. This is not good. If there wasn't a supply demand, we would also not have this problem. So
Absolutely.
a lot of
Absolutely.
like punk kids who are using this need to be better educated by their parents and their schools of not to do drugs. So I mean, it's a very complicated problem, but these nations are not acting in good faith.
Right.
And South America has been a mess forever. And I think Portugal and Spain should have never been brought into the EU. They lied and cheated on their books, just like Greece did too. So,
Although
Napoleonic law,
Spain's
once
being a real
again,
big pain in the ass right now.
oh, they are. I mean, and Spain is 30% unemployment. It's not a good country. So what I'm getting at is this. This is hard, but we did it with Japan and Germany. When you have common law and you have checks and balances in the government, by and large, those societies are very productive and successful. And so, one way of getting rid of a lot of that is to try to get South America to embrace more common law, have more checks and balances, and a more democratic process. Will you be able to do that in a lot of these countries right now as is? Absolutely not.
Right.
But that's the hope, and I think that's one reason why we have so much problems with Islamic countries because Islamic law is pathetic, and then you have Napoleonic and Spanish law, which is not good. And Louisiana is an example of that. I mean, one of the most corrupt, states in America is Louisiana, and part and parcel is because of some of the state law that got in
Yeah.
there, which was influenced by Napoleonic and Spanish law, which is an
That's very
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Man, so let's switch gears a little bit. I wanted to talk to you about the German the Nazi Jews for a lack of a better term. I wanted to talk about that. You've got 800 hours of interviews in the National Holocaust Museum.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me, well, what was it like? What was it like sitting down with some of these guys, man?
No, hey, thanks for the question. Yeah, I'm very honored just to let people know from 1992 to 1998, I interviewed over 400 men of Jewish descent who served in the Nazi military, and it was 800 hours, like Ricky just said, of film material, VHS and 8 millimeter. I've been able to digitize it all, and the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. now has it, and from what I've been told, it's their second largest oral history collection.
That's
When I
awesome.
first, yeah, I'm very proud of that. And I'm thankful to my 24, 25-year-old self that I was running around Germany on a bike with a backpack with a camera and tripod and radio and cassette tapes, computer and printer and getting their consent forms and finding these guys. And it was a fight against time. And it was, my professor at Cambridge, Jonathan Steinberg, he called me the sorcerer's apprentice. Once I called up the waters, if you will, or called up the interviews, I couldn't stop the flood. And he helped me get into the London Telegraph, the New York Times, and so on. I had some really big articles in these newspapers, and a lot of people started coming to me through those as well. When I stopped interviewing, I had over 600 people waiting for me to interview them. I just couldn't, I was just a
Wow.
one-man show. But it was interesting when you do oral history and you really go to the source, and I was able to get their documents. A lot of the archive that I built out was from these people's homes, which that was another interesting thing that was a positive byproduct of doing these oral histories was getting all of the paper documents. And I was getting signed documents from Hitler. I was getting Lugers, bayonets, medals, photographs, you name it. Most of all the stuff you see in my books, Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, Lies of Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, and The Rabbi Saved by Hitler's Soldiers, is all from the people themselves. So and it's in an archive in Germany as well as the archive in the Holocaust Museum. I had so many preconceived ideas when I started this research, some of it coming from my Yale professors that were debunked by doing the research. Like, for example, most of my professors would have said that all Germans knew about the Holocaust. How could they not know? You had Dachau and Sachsenhausen and so on. And what I found doing these interviews is that no, not everybody knew. It was very hard for a lot of these guys thinking that the people they grew up with would be throwing their grandmothers and aunts and uncles and whatnot in the ovens and killing them systematically. And one of the most powerful pieces of history to really prove this that I found interviewing all these guys is that Hitler started dismissing a lot of half Jews who were in the military because of all the problems they were encountering. They would come home from fighting on the front, iron crosses over their chest, and their grandmother's wearing a yellow Jewish star, and she was going to be deported to a concentration camp. And the guy would go to the deportation station and say, "You can't deport this woman," causing a lot of social unrest. So Hitler said either we're going to have to protect all the half Jews or Jewish relatives, or we're going to have to dismiss the half Jews. Well, we can't protect full Jews, their Jewish relatives, get rid of the half Jews. And they started being dismissed in 41, 42, and 43 from the front quite often. And toward the end of the war in 44, Hitler said, there's all these half Jews in society. They were just basically working and studying. They hadn't been really persecuted because you're killing off all the full Jews. You didn't know what to do with the half Jews yet. And he started deporting them in 44 to forced labor camps. So one of the most interesting things I found out during my interviews is that you would think that if everybody knew about the Holocaust, that all these men that in 44, when they were starting to be informed that they were going to be deported to their own forced labor camps, that they would have done everything they could to escape, got to Sweden or
Right.
Switzerland. They would not have got on those trains, but almost 100% of them got on the trains. And only when they got to their forced labor camps, which were very different than concentration camps or death camps, did they go, "Oh my God, now I understand." And so it really showed you how Hitler kept under wraps the systematic extermination of the final solution and how it was just so inconceivable to these people
Yeah, the Jews didn't
that,
even know.
huh?
The Jews didn't even know.
No. In
The
fact,
Jews getting on the trains
Jonathan
didn't know.
Steinberg, my professor from Cambridge, says many of the Jews that were standing in line to the crematoriums in Auschwitz still were in disbelief. And, General Eisenhower, he had been briefed about this. He had gotten a lot of the secret, memorandum on what Hitler was doing, but only when he went to Oldorf and saw the concentration camp did it sink in. And so this was something that was interesting about what you do with information and how you act on it and what your imagination will allow. As one of my interview partners, Hans-Gert Falkenberg, wonderful guy, he said, I should have known. I should have done this. I should have responded this way. But it was just so inconceivable.
Yeah.
I should have protected my grandmother, knowing the information that I now know how I should have interpreted it. So
Yeah.
that was something that was very interesting. Another thing that was very interesting is, how does this nation that is totally devastated and all these men, PTSD, lost a lot of their relatives and so on. Most of them stayed in Germany and they were part of what's called the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic explosion of growth that happened in the 60s and 70s in Germany. So what's interesting is you're looking at I was interviewing all these men that they lost the war, they had served under Hitler, families devastated, and somehow they were able to put all the pieces together and create this incredible nation. Just like a lot of the Holocaust survivors did that with Israel and create these incredible democracies. That was something else that was really interesting that I saw. And then one thing that was very fascinating from these men, how many of them had said, okay, I'm going to make a difference? They created organizations like Werner Goldberg, who was in the Berlin Senate of Christian-Jewish dialogue. Let's stop this Christian anti-Semitism. Let's create friendships with these groups. Many of them developed, like Hans-Gert Blücher, Hans Blücher, excuse me, in Stuttgart. He developed a whole publishing company focusing just on German Jewish history, Holocaust studies, and so on, to get the history out there, preserve the history. And then, I met the former Chancellor of Germany, Helmut Schmidt, and how you make a strong nation, especially against communism, because
Right.
communism caused a lot of the chaos. That's what's crazy what you were saying today in America, seeing people wanting to have socialism. If they would just study a little bit on what chaos it creates. And so as a 20, 3, 24, 25-year-old kid going around and interviewing these people, the party secretary of the SPD, Egon Bahr, I was able to interview, the famous actress, Inga Meisel, and hearing their stories and asking them questions that a lot of times people didn't ask. The one blessing I had, if you will, being an American, being a foreigner, and then also being in America where we don't really have filters. We're very direct and so on. Germans are very polite. They don't ask direct questions. So a lot of times when I got with them, because I was a foreigner, I could do this. If I was a German, they would have called me insolent and, and
A
that I
little
shouldn't be
crazy.
asking such questions. But because I was a foreigner, they were engaging with me. They knew I wanted to learn about this. Many of them started calling me their American grandson. And many of them were between a rock and a hard place. Yeah, they served in the Nazi military, but they're of Jewish descent. Are they a victim or perpetrator? They lost mom in Auschwitz, but this guy got the Iron Cross. Where do they fit? And many of them were never accepted in either society.
Wow.
And so they were able to give a really clear vision of both societies. The
Yeah.
racism a lot of them encountered with their ultra Orthodox Jewish relatives that cut them off because their mother married a goy, a Gentile. And then they found their Christian relatives of their father being extremely anti-Semitic because their father married a Jew. And so they were looking at both the hypocrisies of the societies they came from, the struggles they had with identity. And what was very interesting that I really got from a 10,000 foot view is that these men taught me more than anything else that the way you come to view yourself, are you black or white, a Jew or a Christian, a victim or not a victim, relates directly to how you understand history, but more importantly, with how you treat others. And therein lies the wisdom. How you do self identification is so important with how you treat others. So in America, where we're getting lost is that we're all Americans. We're all part of one race, the human race. We're all part of democracy, and we need to come together and see that the beautiful bridges that bond us are much more plentiful than the tiny little streams that divide us. And where do we find our commonality? And we're not doing that. So these interviews really showed me that these guys, more than anything, really focused on this. And they became, ironically, Ricky, because of their weird background. So they couldn't be called in the German society 100% a Nazi because they had all this persecution. On the other side, they understood this part of society of serving Germany and being, a strong soldier and whatnot, that many of them became very prominent in their respective fields. The founder, Emil Lux, the founder of Home Depot, which is called Obi, a massive, a business in Germany, was one of these guys. The Chancellor of Germany, I just mentioned, and so on. And that was something else that was very interesting, that these guys were in perfect positions, that they weren't sociologically crippled to not be able to immediately seize opportunities right after the war and then rise up in leadership positions in their respective positions.
It's awesome.
And it's because they had that balance, I believe. They had that Jewish background, they had the German background, they knew what they could be proud of, Germany. They also knew what they needed to get rid of. And many of them would tell me this. If I didn't have this little Jewish background that I have, a grandparent or two grandparents, I would have become a Waffen SS officer. I would have
Right.
gotten into this. But because I had that in my background, it made me think critically. And I think that's something else that I got out of these people that was just an incredible jewel of information for me about, like what Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, said, never go to extremes. And as you're mentioning, in America, we're seeing that more and more, and that's where you get in danger zones, both
Yeah.
Democrats and Republicans, for that matter. And that's what these interviews also told me, that the balance. And you see that in the democratic process in Germany with the Christian, CDU, the Christian Democratic Party, and then the Social Democratic Party, SPD, uh, and how they work together. Not always perfect. And then there's a whole bunch of other parties that you have to get coalitions, just kind of like in Israel. I think that's a better system than having these two parties that dominate like we do.
Right.
Uh,
Right. I actually, our forefathers, the way they would look at the political parties of today. So they hated political parties. They hated them. They called them factions,
mhm.
and they warned against them. They warned us against factions. They warned us against separating by political party.
You're well
And
read. Yes.
it's like I get it. I really do get it, because 80, like I said, 80% of us, and it's only the 10% on each end that makes that makes 80% look bad. And the 80% of us are right down the middle. And that's the way it's always been here in the United States for like 250 years. There has been the 10% extremes on each side, and then 80% right down the middle. But now I'm finding the 80% down the middle are the ones that have to apologize these days. And they're like the 10% on each side, they're like, you got to pick a side. And I'm like, if I got to pick a side, I'm going to pick my side. That's what side I'm going to pick. And we had mentioned a little bit about how Christians view Jews. I'm a Christian. I'm not religious. I'm very spiritual.
Hmm.
I believe in God. I believe in a higher power and all that. But I just organized religion's a little fuddy duddy for me. But I look at Jews like my brothers, right?
Hmm.
They're very religiously close to Christians. Our religions aren't that dissimilar. As a matter of fact, we share a Bible, and so I myself look at Jews as my brothers, as my brothers and sisters, and I think I think that's how a lot of people would look at the Jewish religion itself if they understood. Like, well, first of all, Judaism isn't a religion; it's Judaism is a people.
Well, it's
And
three. It's three. I mean, it is a religion, Judaism. It's a people, and it's an ethnicity, which is very different than Christianity, which
yes,
is
yes,
strictly a belief.
yes, yes. And so I think that if we could come together in this country and because for 250 years we've been a beacon of light for the entire world, you know, if we could get our shit together in this country, I think that spreads.
Hmm. Yeah, and on that note, we by and large, compared to most systems that we've seen throughout time, especially dynastic systems, royalty and whatnot, our system is the best. It may not be perfect. We're still an experiment, and we're an evolving country, and we course correct quite often, and we do it well, especially after slavery. I mean, I had three great great grandfathers that fought for the Union to do away with slavery. They put their lives on the line. I lost a lot of uncles and cousins dying to free African Americans. So I take a lot of offense a lot of times when I see these DEI black Americans being anti-Semitic because I have Jewish background as well. Anti-Semitic, saying, I actually helped free your people, my family,
Right.
and now you're coming out and you're saying Jews are ultra white power and have all
Yeah.
this money. I'm like, don't you have you studied Nazi Germany and study that race doesn't answer the question? So yeah, I like what you're saying that you have the Christian background. You think of the Jews as your brothers. There is this Judaic Christian tradition in America that has helped create good laws in society.
Absolutely.
Take care of your neighbor, love your enemy, and so on. Although I like to kill my enemies, but I understand that it's a lot better than saying kill all gays, kill all unbelievers, and kill all apostates.
Well, you
Which
know what they
is
say, once a Marine, always a Marine.
hoorah. Um, so, I think embracing our neighbors and realizing, you can have different religions until it crosses the line of being intolerant. And we need to be
Yes.
very
Yes.
intolerant of intolerance.
There you go. That's a great way to put it, Brian.
Yeah. And that's what
Intolerant of intolerance.
yeah. And we need to stop being politically correct. It doesn't work. It kills us.
Yes, it
Islam is
does.
not George Bush was wrong. Islam is not a religion of peace. There is a reason why on many Islamic flags there's the Mameluke sword. It's because the Islam was not spread throughout the world because of logic, reason, and by nice people speaking about it. It's because they would cut off your head if you didn't convert.
Yes, yes.
And
Or
Christianity has that also to something. I mean, the 30 Years' War, Protestants and Catholics slaughtering each other, the Inquisition. It took a government like ours, with James Madison and Thomas Jefferson separating church and state, to discipline religion. You don't have to be a
yes,
part of a religious party to be in government, and you're not required. And you cannot dictate religious policy as mandate of law, which is
yes,
America. And that's what makes it so beautiful. Islam is everything against that. Christianity used to be that way, and that's why our founding fathers said no more 30 Years' War. A lot of people don't realize that the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648, when 30 million people were slaughtered because they were either Catholic or Protestant, really influenced our founding fathers to say, we're not having this. And thank God, no pun intended, that we had people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and others that said, we're not doing this. And that most of our founding fathers were deists, which in many respects you could say, in today's parlance, they were anti-theist, atheist. They did not believe in a power that was intervening, and they did not believe in one type of mandate that, God had revealed himself in the Catholic way, or the Lutheran way, or the Calvinist way, and so on. And these guys were visionaries because they were students of history. And we need to be thankful every day for our founding fathers. And like you said, people need to find all the 99 wonderful, great things about America, except like one thing that might be negative that Omar is focusing on, or
yes.
Talib and yelling about, or are these Olympians. You are
Oh
representing
man,
America. You have USA. I mean,
that's so gross.
yeah, I mean, I respect the freedom of speech,
Me
but
too.
like Amber, I forget her last name, Glenn or whether the ice skater
I
that she
shut it off.
takes.
I got to be honest. I didn't watch any of it because that pissed me off so bad. It pissed me off that the media even asked in the first place how they feel about. But
They're not educated about this. It's like, a lot of these actors, don't comment on things that you are not educated about. Now, freedom of speech is all one thing, but don't use a platform that it's not about political action or whatnot, where it's appropriate. And these athletes should be saying, hey, I'm representing America, I'm representing my teammates, I'm doing the best I can. That's all they need to be saying.
absolutely,
And Amber Glenn or whatever, and then Hess, I think these two guys, they were blowing their pie holes off about, different issues. And I think Amber is really egregious that she takes out the gay flag, all the time. It's like, okay, I don't care what you do with your private parts, being in your bedroom.
but yeah, what
Stop
happened to
shoving this
leaving
down.
that in the bedroom?
Yeah. And if you want to be a lesbian, that's fine. I don't care. Just don't shove it down my face. And on the international stage is not the platform to be
Right.
talking about how you don't like America and that you want to, push gay rights. Stop it. People are fed up with it. If a lot of people who are against Trump want to get one message of why he won, it's because people are tired of people using the platform here for their liberal, ultra liberal agendas. You
Yes.
know, I'm all
Yes.
for you having that agenda, but put it into context and have the proper place. Go to an LGBTQ conference and wave your flag. But don't do it out in international, airspace when you're representing the United States. It should be an
Yes.
American flag, period.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, and I talking about Donald Trump. So the reason why I voted for Donald Trump is I like his policies. But when you're talking to people who are anti-Trump, they don't know his policies, and that's it doesn't drive me nuts or anything like that. It just kind of makes me giggle a little bit because those who oppose the guy don't really know what he's about, and when I explain to them like Joe Biden's foreign policies were a lot similar to Donald Trump's foreign policies. Donald Trump's foreign policies were a lot similar um, to Bill Clinton's foreign policies. I think they're very similar in how they behave, and explaining to folks how politics works here in the United States. The United States president really doesn't have much say in domestic policies. That's all something that Congress has to work together with the United States president on. But foreign policy, like that's where the United States president shines, is because he can affect as much foreign policy as he wants. That's not, it doesn't have to go through Congress.
I
So
mean this,
that's,
yeah. Yeah, I mean
but
this Trump phenomenon, I personally believe, him doing away with Roe versus Wade was a violation of women's rights. I think that's going to go down as one of his worst things that he's done.
I
But
did. I did until it was explained to me on. So Roe v. Wade actually didn't have anything to do with abortion. It was women's health care, and it was the right to for women to deal directly with their doctors on healthcare matters. But the way it was explained to me, it wasn't about repealing Roe v. Wade. It was about repealing as a part of a federal issue. And I think what Donald Trump said at the time was he was like, this is a states' rights issue. The federal government really doesn't have anything to do with this. We shouldn't be involving ourselves in these matters. It's a state rights issue.
yeah.
And that's where I agreed with Donald Trump on. Where I disagreed was with I'm not a woman, so it really doesn't I can't really project how I feel about I'm pro-life, but at the same time I'm pro-choice too because it's not me.
Yeah,
You
and a
know, it
lot of women, that are having, dead babies in their bodies, the doctors can't do an abortion, and then they go septic and they die. There's been several
yeah.
cases of that in Texas. So I mean, this
Yes.
is where it gets crazy. I understand the legal argument that this should have been a states' rights to begin with, and I guess the Supreme Court supported that. but you're having a lot of people's autonomy,
Yes.
females, taken away from them, and many of them are dying because of it that would have been alive. And that's, I also on the other side, I think there is needs to be some rights for the unborn child. You can't use this in the 6 month as birth control. I mean,
Yes. Yes.
that's ridiculous. So I do believe there needs to be more argument and so on, but taking away it draconian wise, in different states is bad. So the reason why I brought that up is that I think he's going to go down that he made a focus of this. That's going to be by and large by the historians, that's going to be negative. But when you look at taking away money from the pathetic nation of Pakistan, positive, killing the Ayatollah, or helping Israel kill the Ayatollah and taking out this horrible regime, that will be a positive. Him giving Secretary of Defense Mattis full carte blanche to take out ISIS, save the Yazidi people. A lot of people don't know this. There was a genocide that the Islamic State was going after and killing in droves that they were polytheistic, a small little group of people in Syria called the Yazidis. And for 8 years under Obama, who was a weak president, I think he was a good man, but a weak president, allowed them to grow and just kill these people. He didn't do anything because he and especially Hillary Clinton wanted always the reports about to kill somebody to come to them. And then by the time they gave permission, the guy had already moved on.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
Trump, to my knowledge, told Mattis, kill the guy and then tell me about it. And
Right.
within like a month, we neutered ISIS and we saved the Yazidis people. That's a good thing Trump did. Trump started dialogue between the UAE and Israel. This is good. So there's a lot of good things that he's done, a lot of just bad things. I mean, he's not a really good businessman. He's gone bankrupt. He lies and he cheats.
The bankruptcies could be like one could argue the bankruptcies it could be a good thing for a businessman.
It's not an ethical way of doing things, but yeah, it
Right.
could have been a strategy. So I mean, that people on both sides are not able to look at the negatives and positives. It's almost like Trump's become a religion.
Yes.
And when you say he's a nasty individual in the court documents with Ivanka, his first wife, he was, she accused him of rape. They took that, and he did rape her, according to her. And then this other Carol, he raped her. People say, "Oh, that's all
Yeah,
made
yeah.
up," and so on. It's like, no, there might be a grain of truth there.
Well, what I always said with with oh, damn it, I forgot his name. Bill Cosby, where there's that much smoke,
Yeah.
there's
Or
got
like
to be fire.
Epstein, that's another
Yeah.
thing. Trump, I
Yeah.
don't know how he's going to get out of this Epstein thing and what's actually going to be there
That whole
once.
thing is crazy.
I mean,
The
people are getting arrested and politicians in England, nobody in
well,
America yet, really.
I think I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So Prince Andrew, I'm not really sure how that's going to work out. Like that would never happen here because they don't have any. They didn't. They arrested him for possibly doing something illegal.
Yeah,
Possibly.
but against the government, not
Right.
raping teenage girls. I mean, that
Right.
guy, first of all, he's an idiot. He's stupid.
I agree.
And that he's represented. It shows you why dynastic rule doesn't work. You
Yes.
know,
Yes.
and second of all the things that he's done, he can't get away this. That should be the last things that he does in the outside world. But you have a lot of people like this, and I can't believe Epstein got into, Bill Gates. I used
Yes.
to always think of Bill Gates as a really nice guy, nerd, good husband. Now it seems that he's with Russian prostitute or Russian girls they brought in, getting diseases and hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. What an idiot, you
Well, I
know?
have a theory that like most rich people are just freaking weirdos. And it's because like billionaires specifically when they have so much money they'll
Like
never be
Elon
poor.
Musk.
Yes, yes. I'm not sure how weird Elon Musk gets, but if you look like he's got like 20, he's got a lot of kids and doesn't have a good relationship with any of them, you know, and he's like now a trillionaire. So
Well, it's
I'm
like the
sure
famous
that's guy.
businessman in Texas, Hunt. He had
Yes,
a lot of kids believing eugenics. So supposedly Jeffrey Epstein also believed in a lot of eugenics. These people get power, they start believing in their own greatness, and they want to
yes,
spread their seed. That's also evolution. I mean, Genghis Khan held thousands and thousands of children.
yes.
Charlemagne supposedly had hundreds, if not a few thousand as well. Every time he went to a new village, he was, sleeping with one of the farm lasses and so
Yeah.
on. So, it's interesting when power, there's a book out there, I believe it's by Robin Baker called Sperm Wars. And he said when people get into positions of power, their sperm production increases. So it's
Really? I
almost
wonder
like
if is
yeah,
that
you almost
true?
set up like a guy like Bill Clinton, who already has a problem with keeping his pants on and being loyal to people and abusing his power sexually. You give him power, and all of a sudden they got all this, extra sperm, according to Robin Baker's, sociological evolutionary theories that he has and scientific studies. They have a tendency of believing in their own greatness, wanting to get, more women, and they have more sperm to get rid of.
Right.
It's a very interesting phenomenon. But still, I mean, this is why we have a frontal lobe and logic and rationale and ethics. And especially when it comes to young girls, then the lines cross. These guys are criminals and should be put away, the
Yeah,
Jeffrey
and
Epstein
and
people.
that's where I'm at with the whole thing, right? There's so much of it out there. Like everybody so I don't believe in guilty by association, but the whole smoke and fire thing, if there's
Like Bill
evidence,
Cosby, I mean, it's
yes,
obvious he abused his
if
power.
if there's evidence, right, of crimes against children, these people need to be held to account no matter who it is.
Yeah, and I
No,
like the new Florida law, if I understand it correctly. If you are found guilty of raping a child under the age of 12, they have the death penalty. I say
yeah,
kill them
yeah.
all. I
Well,
have
so
zero tolerance for pedophiles.
there's less than a 1% rehabilitation rate, less than 1% for all. This is all
Oh yeah,
sex
Bill
offenders.
Walsh, on American Most Wanted, he had some
Yeah,
scientists come in there like and supported what you said that once somebody has especially been found as being a pedophile or whoever is a pedophile, not even found out, you cannot change them.
right.
They are who they are.
Yes, and I believe that 100%. And let's just say, like, if anybody has proof of Donald Trump doing so, like, not only should Donald Trump be held to account, but anybody that helped cover that up, like we also
I
need to
hear you,
hold them to
Ricky.
account.
Absolutely. And I
And
think that's some of the fear of what's going on. I mean, obviously Andrew was with underage girls and he knew
yes,
it.
and it's so obvious. It is so obvious, and there's proof there. And what I'm saying is, like, listen, I voted for Donald Trump. I really like Donald Trump's policies, but if he's one of them, hang him too. Hang him too, and do it
Yep.
publicly. And anybody that helped cover it up, because like they this is not a right or a left thing. This is right or wrong, and if we don't stand up and protect our children, who the hell's going to?
I hear you. Absolutely. I still, the some of the stats are just kind of mind-numbing to me. One in four girls by the time they get out of college, and one in
Yeah.
eight boys by the time they get to that college age. A lot of times it's done in with boys is when they're young, but are violated. One in four girls, one in eight. What's going on? And
Yes.
thank God we have a society unlike Islam, so Islamic societies, you don't have them bringing a lot of pedophiles. In fact, they're supporting it, especially in Afghanistan with the Taliban. That's a whole
Yeah.
nother, like that is
Yeah.
sick that they have a society full of pedophiles. But, we have a society that if you are found guilty, you do get punished, you do get labeled. But my wife and I have a 1.5-year-old little girl in my second family. And we just were curious looking at our neighborhood in Arlington, around Lake Arlington, if there were any registered sex offenders. And we were shocked that like within a 5 mile radius, there was like 280. And I was
Yeah.
like, why? There's a side of me. I was like, why are they in society, especially if they
Yeah.
violated a child
Yes.
that's young? And so this is why I like that Florida law. And there's a side of me that I would like that law to be enacted in Texas, and in some respects retroactively. If they have
Yeah.
somebody that's in jail for 20 years for raping a 6-year-old, and they have only 20 years, get that new law in and just, execute the person. That is
And
a person you don't want in society.
you know you're going to come up against resistance with that because there's so many of them, right? And my whole thing is like, just give the data, give the stats. Less than 1% rehabilitation rate. You can't, it's much like Iran and radicals. The only thing they know is violence. Well, with pedophiles and rapists, and keep in mind, this is not just pedophiles. The less than 1% rehabilitation rate, that's for all sex offenders, all
Yeah.
of them.
And we're seeing that. I mean, the movie Spotlight that
Yes.
highlighted
Yeah.
the Bernard Law, the bishop of the Boston diocese. He was taking these pedophile Catholic priests, knowing they had hurt children, and putting them in new parishes.
Yes.
And he was a fugitive from law, escaped to the Vatican, was given a church, a majority, and we asked for him to come back to face justice, and the Vatican refused to do it.
Yes.
You know, the Catholic Church has so much to ask forgiveness for, especially violating children. But, I was horrified to find out about the Boy Scouts,
Yes. Yes.
as well. So, anytime you have a institution that has children, you got to be very careful about the people you bring on and checking them. But the Catholic Church has been one of the most disgraceful organizations of violating
I
children.
agree. I agree.
But luckily we live in the greatness of America. We live in a country that you and I can talk about this, and that we have laws against it, and we're putting a lot of these people away in jail, and that's a very good thing when you look at other nations and how they deal with it.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Bryan, it's this has been such a great conversation. We're coming up on 2 hours, man.
Thanks, Ricky,
It's
for having me. This has been very interesting. I appreciate the questions and you having me on your show.
well, I when I talk to people, I always tell them like, look, this is how I like to do things, and when the whole conversation thing, I'll tell you the reason why I do that. I like talking to people, man. I really, really like talking to people. And there's some things that you and I probably don't agree on. It's like during this conversation, there's probably not many things that we don't agree on, but there's probably things. And we can
And
have this
that's okay.
conversation. Yeah, exactly. It is okay because like we don't have to hate each other. We don't have to be mean to each other. We don't have to say hateful shit. We don't have to do any of that stuff. It's just a conversation between two fellas, man. And we just happen to be recording it, and we're going to put it out there for everybody to listen to. Bryan, where can people find your books, man?
Oh, well, thanks, Ricky, for that plug. All my books are on Amazon dot com. I also have a website, which is my full name, Bryan Mark Rigg, Mark spelled with a K, Rigg dot com. And if people want signed copies and whatnot, they can email me through the website. But all my books are through Amazon that they can buy if they want.
I think
And
I'm going to
the
take you
World
up
War
on
II
that.
books are the main ones are Hitler's Jewish soldiers and Japan's Holocaust. And then if people want to learn about conquering learning disabilities, I have a book with that title, ADHD and dyslexia. And then I have a book coming out here shortly, probably this summer, called A Case Against Christ. And it's a response to Lee Strobel's famous book, A Case for Christ, which I think is a bogus work and horrible research. And my book proves that in droves. And so I taught for a long time religious history at SMU, the history of God and history of the Bible. And I was horrified by the Bible illiteracy of my students. So that's another reason why I decided when I first met Lee Strobel in 2004 and was teaching this course that eventually I would write a book like this to educate people, and that's what I've done. So those are kind of the big books out there. And people, if there's Marines listening, I have one of the definitive works on the Pacific War called Flamethrower. I
Yes.
documented the Medal of Honor recipient Woody Williams, who was the last World War II Medal of Honor recipient to die. And I went to Iwo Jima with him twice in 2015 and 2018, walked the battlefields with him, and wrote up his biography, but put it into the context of the Pacific War. And that book's called Flamethrower. and a couple of commandants Krulak, commandants Gray. The Marine Corps said this was the best work they've ever read on the Pacific War. So that's just a nice little plug for my brother Marines. If you're interested in Marine Corps history, that's the book for you.
Hell yeah, man. Listen, I'm looking at your books right now. Your covers are amazing. I love the artwork that you put on there, the artwork that you chose, especially Flamethrower. That one's really, really cool. I
Yep.
like that one.
That's an
Um,
actual guy going into battle from the Ninth Marines over the berm there at Iwo Jima.
that's awesome.
And
Man, that
and
is
what people don't
awesome.
realize, it's called flamethrower, but what people don't realize is that the portable flamethrower was one of the best weapons of choice fighting the Japanese. And one third of all Japanese on the island of Iwo Jima, how we killed them was we incinerated them because they
No
weren't on
shit.
the island, they were in the island. So
No
training our
kidding.
men how to use the flamethrower was critical in fighting the Japanese. In fact, right before we invaded Japan, which we didn't have to because the atomic bomb spared us, but the Marines have a phrase, every man a rifleman. Every Marine a rifleman. Everybody is trained how to fight in the Marine Corps. Well, before the invasion of Japan, they were saying every Marine a flamethrower operator. That was going to be a universal weapon that everybody was going to know how to fight with because that was going to be required for fighting the Japanese
No
because they wouldn't
kidding.
surrender. You had to burn them out.
Man, that's you know what? I've got to have you back on probably a few times. This has been
Sure.
such a great conversation, but we didn't get into ADHD or dyslexia at all. I don't have dyslexia, but I do have ADHD, and it's very severe. I also have autism, and I was recently diagnosed at age 40 with autism.
Hmm.
And how that came to be was I have a 6-year-old son, and he has level 2 autism. And what that means is he's going to need significant help throughout his
Yeah,
entire
my oldest
life.
daughter has autism.
Really,
Yeah.
that's so small world. So I always thought it was genetic, and there's obviously quite a bit more things to go into that. And so I went to the doctor, and I kind of made a joke, and I was like, I think I want to be tested for autism. And the doctor says, "Well, what makes you think that you might have autism?" And I said, "Well, my son, he has autism, and he had to have gotten it somewhere." And the doctor didn't argue with me, and I thought it was a joke. I was trying to be funny, and I was like, "Oh, that was a joke." And they were like, "Oh, I got it. It's just you're probably right. It is genetic." And I was like, "Shit," but
Well, it's
I
interesting.
went.
The research that I found, autism can be obtained, if you will, by chemicals and poison,
Yes,
and being exposed to certain things. There is a genetic component to it. Also, they see that if you're having children older in
yes,
life,
yes.
that the eggs and the sperm is not as viable, and the byproduct can be autism. It's still the jury's out to some degree. ADHD, by and large, it has an 80% inheritance success
No
rate.
kidding. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I think I'm a historian, and I had Christopher Stinger look at this. He wrote Lone Survivors, talking about how the Homo sapiens were the only bipedal species that survived versus like Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon man and so on. And he looked over this because he's head of the National History Museum in England. And he says, you're on to something. I believe everybody was ADHD and dyslexic until about 10,000 years ago when we had the agricultural revolution. We started learning how to grow our food. But when we
Yeah.
were all hunters and gatherers, that was superior hunter gatherer brains,
Yes. Yes.
ADHD and dyslexia. Now, ADHD sometimes can happen if you've been sexually abused. And a
Really?
lot of times, people, when they see the ADHD behavior, they think, oh, we have to do Ritalin or we have to do a special diet, we have to do special education, when it's actually they need therapy. So, for
Yeah.
parents listening to this, ADHD and dyslexia is by and large inherited. But especially in girls, if you're seeing it express, you need to attack it from two different angles. One, to see if there's been any sexual abuse, and if it is, it's a different type of therapy you need to do to heal that child.
That's interesting.
Versus if the child just has ADHD and dyslexia. So that's something else I talk in my book extensively, and doing it from a historical point of view to give people a context to understand why do we have this to begin with.
Right, right. You know, one thing when you'd mentioned hunter gatherers and ADHD, it took me when I was a kid, I was actually really good at tracking things with my eyes, and except for baseball, I sucked at baseball, but I was really good at tracking like animals with my eyes, especially at a distance. Now that I'm older, I can't really do that, but it's when things move, I track them easier.
Well, that's
And
exactly a hunter.
yes, yes, and it's like I did not know that that was connected to
Yeah. It's not that their
ADHD until
attention
recently.
deficit hyperactivity disorder, what ADHD means, is that you pay attention to everything, but it's to pay
Yes,
attention to everything to then be able to immediately hyper focus. Are you
right,
going to make, are you going to make this animal your meal, or is that animal going to make a meal out of you? You know,
exactly.
and you got to have high adrenaline activity. In fact, the three communities that have the highest level of ADHD and dyslexia are special forces, fighter pilots, prison.
I learned that from a CIA agent.
Yeah. Yeah.
They CIA actively recruits for ADHD.
I didn't know that, but it wouldn't be surprising because they are good at figuring out puzzles too. In fact, the best astrophysicists out there are dyslexic because they
I didn't know
flip
that either.
things and they can see, and that's also why the core morbidity of ADHD and dyslexia usually quite often happens together because you got to have the ADHD, to be scanning. And then dyslexia, when you're scanning, if you can flip the image in your brain, you see more detail, so you can track better.
That's interesting, man. And I have a really vivid imagination. I wonder if that's connected somehow.
That's ADHD. Wacky,
That's
zany
awesome.
humor and imagination. But imagination helps you track and
Yeah.
preempt animals and what they're
And
going to
it
do.
helps me plan things as well. Like in my everyday life, for instance, planning this studio, I knew what I wanted it to look like before I'd even bought the materials to do
Yeah.
it. I knew I wanted. Well, I knew I wanted this blue curtain and in the background. I knew I wanted the colors in the room. I knew I had to pick gray because on the wall colors because of all the red and blue in here. And
Yeah.
I knew that going into it, and then a year later is when I built it, and it looks exactly like it did in my head a year apart. So
Well,
it's
we
very interesting.
two nations, Australia and America, have the highest level of ADHD and dyslexia compared to the world. The world in general usually about 3%. Australia and America 20%. Penal colonies of the British Empire and the people who had the guts to leave and populate these areas quite often were ADHD. And the highest level of patents for inventions are only in two nations, Australia and America. And I
No
firmly believe
kidding.
it's because of that.
That is awesome. And like, see, I've got to have a conversation with you just about that book in particular.
Sure. I'd be honored,
Awesome.
Ricky. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming, Bryan. It's been a pleasure. We'll link we'll link your website down in the description down below. Are you on social media at all?
No, I
Okay.
have Facebook. I have a Facebook tag that I have. I do some historical essays, but I kind of, this is going to be my social media footprint is going on podcast.
Hell yeah. I would stay away from social media as much as possible if I could, but I have to use it for work. But Bryan, it's been awesome. Hang out with me for just a moment. Hey guys, jump on Amazon, grab one of Bryan's books. We're all fans of World War II history. And you know what? If we don't remember where we came from, we won't know where we're going, man. So with that, we'll see you guys next time.